Over 100 years ago or so, this area where you're sitting right now was originally called Tally Cavey. This land, before this school was built here, long ago there was a stable here that was attached for a Victorian home that was farther up the hill. They say that that house and this land was haunted. And it started, as most hauntings do, with a murder that took place here. Now, that Victorian house that was up there, it was originally known as the Sweeney House, but its reputation was gained long before the Sweeneys owned it. You see, no one knew who built it or how long ago it was built, but it was standing empty one day when a young couple moved to this village in a rather still really relatively uncivilized land. The couple came in, a young man and his wife, and all of the ladies around the town who heard that they had a new couple, they did as was their custom. They, came together to visit upon them, call on them, invite them to church and so on. And so they came and they knocked upon the door, and the young man came to answer. He was a friendly young man. He welcomed them, and when finding upon what their errand was, he chatted with them as he walked them around to the parlor. When the women came into the parlor, they noticed that the woman was standing in front of the window, and she was gazing out. The husband tried to make introductions, but, "Do you see them? Do you see them?" The women of the town who had no idea what she was talking about, they couldn't see anything out the window. And so the conversation, well, it was rather uphill work. The women tried to talk to her, and she was rather aloof, or maybe shy. She had long gray black hair that was pulled back to the nape of her neck. She had pale skin. And she had on a long gray taffeta dress that rustled when she walked. Well, after a rather uncomfortable visit, the ladies finally left. And, they did come back to call upon the woman many times, but she just never was friendly. It was kind of a shame because her husband was very, very friendly. Well, after a time, the ladies finally just gave up and stopped calling. They would see the woman occasionally out, maybe posting a letter or going to the market or maybe just wandering aimlessly around the streets. There was one curious thing that they did notice. She was always dressed in a long, gray taffeta dress that rustled when she walked. Now, she was either in the same dress that she had always been in the first day that they met her, or she had several dresses that were cut from the same fabric and the same pattern, but always that long, gray taffeta dress. Another curious thing, that a friend of the husband's came to stay with them for a period of time to do business in town, and he reported later that at night she would be up in her long gray taffeta dress all night. And she would be walking and she would be going and locking the bolts on the windows and turning the locks on the doors. And she'd walk around all night making sure that everything was locked so she'd be safe inside. He said he knew she had that dress on because he could hear the rustlings of that skirt. Well, one day the townspeople were surprised to find out that the house was up for sale. Well, the townswomen were really feeling kind of bad that they had not tried harder to befriend this woman who was obviously quite frightened. So they felt, well, at least we can go and call upon her one more time before she leaves. And so they came and they knocked upon the door, and the friendly husband came to open the door. And but he was rather surprised this time. He said, I thought you knew my wife has gone back east. She was so nervous all of the time, afraid of things she thought she saw, and so she went back. And I will go and join her as soon as I can sell the house and wrap up my business affairs. And well, they believed him. I mean, he was such a friendly, kind man. Who wouldn't have? Well, about a week or so later, the house was sold. A week later, the new family moved in, the Sweeney family. Mrs. Sweeney got a beautiful home, but a little bit of a surprise. She was drinking the water and thought it tasted kind of funny. And they went out and they went to look into the cistern, and when they opened it up, there at the bottom of the cistern lay the woman that was in the gray taffeta dress. She'd been murdered. Well, there wasn't anything to be done. The man was long gone. No one knew where he went. They couldn't really do anything about that, but they took the woman out of the cistern and gave her a Christian burial. And all went fine for a while. One summer, the Sweeney's niece by the name of Musetta came to spend some time with them. They didn't tell Musetta about the murder. But somehow, Musetta knew, before she even walked into the house, she knew something was wrong. She was terrified of that house. She would not be in that house by herself ever. If she came home, she would open up the door, she'd hold it open behind her, and she'd call out. And if her aunt was there, she would go in. Well, one afternoon, she came home, she opened the door, she held it open, and she called out. She didn't hear an answer, but she thought she heard footsteps upstairs and the rustling of a skirt. So she took a step in and let the door close behind her. Just then, up on the landing right in front of her, there appeared a woman in a long gray taffeta dress. Musetta took one look at her and knew that she was not made of flesh and blood. She was not human. She stood there terrified. The woman had pale skin and berry red lips and long, bony fingers with long, pointed nails. The woman started to come down the steps at Musetta. Musetta couldn't move. The woman started to reach out towards her. Musetta knew that somehow instinctively she knew that woman meant to embrace her. And she knew that if those arms went around her, that they would feel as cold as death. She couldn't move. The woman continued to glide down. She was coming closer and closer to Musetta. She reached out to her. Musetta reached around behind her, roached open the door, and ran home. She ran the 10 miles home that night to her parents' house. And she would not return to that house. You couldn't pay her to go into that house. Years later, that Victorian home that stood not far from here was torn down. The stables that were on this property where you sit were burned mysteriously. And as spirits are apt to do, they'll find the next location. The next thing that was built was that white farmhouse that stands between you and your car. They say that on dark nights just as this one, you can see the shadow of a woman following the same pattern around the upstairs of that house? And they say that if you're really, really quiet, you can hear the rustling of a gray taffeta dress.